Sophomores, it's Mr. A. I haven't got a chance to lecture to you guys in a while in the light of all the things that have been going on with COVID-19. So I'm coming at you from my office at home with a short lecture that I'm going to ask that you listen to and comment on plants. Rather than just continuing to give you guys the notes, I want to give you a little bit of a lecture on things that I expect and some things that maybe are a little bit more important for you to hear and go over. What I'm going to do for you today is, you can see over here, I've got the notes that I posted, and I'm going to go back and forth between that photo booth, and then I have a plant presentation that I'm going to show you and bring up as we continue to go through chapters 21 through 23. Before I do that, just a couple quick notes. You guys all took your test. I'm going to put some of the more common mistakes up on Schoology on the update section here in the next, hopefully, day or two. I still have a couple that haven't taken it, so look for that to come shortly. Interviews that you guys did with the ag professional and the medical professional were really good. I enjoyed looking through those. If you feel like you didn't get your points, please contact me and I will make sure we take care of that. And I just got done grading your PowerPoints on the plant. I'm going to talk about some of the errors that maybe you were making throughout that, but everybody has an individual comment on your PowerPoint, so you know what you got and why you got that. So again, reach out to me if you have any questions. You're never a bother. You should have my phone number. Text me, call me, or you can email me as well, or Schoology message, whichever works for you. With that being said, we're going to go into talking about plants. Now, like I said, I've got a PowerPoint here, and then I've got some notes that you're going to be looking at as well. And ultimately, I'm going to start with, why are plants important? Well, one of the reasons plants are important is because you can do all kinds of fun things with them, right? You can put your baby girl in a pumpkin, or you can give her a rose, or you can, plant a wheat field, or farm it, or give it to cattle. You can use it for ranching. You could wear a sweet shirt with roses on it. Roses are a plant. A good old farming hat for seeding. You can have plants in your office. You can eat a banana. You can put lemon in your water, right? A good old lemon. Avocados, delicious foods. This is I think it's a grapefruit. I don't like grapefruit, but it was in our fridge. Mangoes, the list goes on with fun and exciting things you can do with plants, right? So what are they, and what really is it all about? Well, here we can see that plants are made up of eukaryotic cells. One of the very first things that we talk about in your notes is they are eukaryotic multicellular organisms. Well, that's just like us as humans. So what are some key differences between plants and animals? Well, this should be a review to you. We've talked about this quite a bit, but plants have a chloroplast right here. Animals do not. Plants have a cell wall. Again, animals do not. And then plants have a large vacuole. Animals have a smaller vacuole. So there's three key distinguishing factors that are different between plants and animals. Even though they're both eukaryotic multicellular organisms, plants have chloroplasts, larger vacuoles, and cell walls. Plants are, and this was a question on your PowerPoint, they are very similar to present-day algae. I'm going to flip this slide here. It says scientists think plants probably evolved from green algae in the sea because plants and green algae have same types of chlorophyll and carotenoids. And then the fossils are very similar. Some of you put charophytes or Spirogyra as what we think plants came from. These are both types of green algae. So I made a comment. You should not have gotten docked for that. But ultimately, we think that plants come from green algae, or are closely related to green algae. But there are some key differences that plants had to make sure that they were ready for when they took on life on land. One of them is a cuticle, which is a waxy covering that helps prevent water loss. Of course, algae don't need to worry about water loss because they live in water. They have stoma or stomata, which are openings that allow the exchange of gases. Again, a question on your PowerPoint. It allows things like carbon dioxide into the plant, and then oxygen and water go out of it. Once again, Algae didn't need to worry about this because they would just exchange material through osmosis and diffusion directly with the water. Plants have vascular tissue. We're going to learn about vascular tissue called the xylem and the phloem. And plants have seeds, whereas algae don't need to, again, worry about having seeds with protective coatings. They have a different means of reproducing. If you look on my next slide here, it kind of takes you through some of that same stuff, and you can pause and read through this. I don't want to take a ton of time to go through every slide, but ultimately the big challenge that plants had to overcome as they evolved away from green algae is that they needed to be equipped for life on land. And these different things, a cuticle, stomata, vascular tissue, and a good protective coating for their seeds are what helped them to be successful. Here you can see a picture of the parts of a seed. Now I want to make sure that you know the parts of a seed. So again, if you want to pause this, you can. I was going to put a blank seed on here so you could study the parts a little bit, but know that the cotyledon is the part that contains the food for that baby plant. The baby plant itself is made up of a plumule, which becomes ultimately, this says the first shoot of the plant, it becomes its leaves. It has the radicle, which will ultimately become the roots, and there's a stem here that's not pointed out as well. So these three parts, the stem, which isn't labeled, the radicle, which will become the roots, and the plumule, all make up what's called the embryo of the plant. I'm going to highlight that. The embryo of the plant are the three parts of the plant that are the baby version of it. Is the cotyledon a part of the embryo? The answer is no. The cotyledon is the food for when that baby is in the ground, so that it has the energy so that it can germinate through the ground and grow into a bigger plant. So this is talked about a little bit right in here. We've got the radicle, the stem, and the plumule, and the cotyledon. That's mentioned within that part of your notes. Continuing on, I really like this picture here. I think it does a great job of talking about the life cycle that includes the alternation of generation of plants. This was, again, a question that I asked you guys to do on your PowerPoint. The haploid version of the alternation of generations for plants is called the gametophyte generation, and the diploid is called the sporophyte. This picture is kind of neat because you can see this here would represent the gametophyte stage of these plants, and this over here represents the sporophyte stage. We mostly see the sporophyte stage of a plant's life. The only time maybe you have seen the gametophyte stage would be if you saw bryophytes, which are, this is moss. If you've seen moss out in the out in the woods or the forest or wherever you guys are out running around, this would be the moss part of it would be the gametophyte stage. Otherwise, plants really spend the majority of their life in the sporophyte stage. So I wanted to point that out to you with this slide here. It says, again, it talks about the alternation of generations. Most of you did a good job with that on your PowerPoint, but wanted to clear that up for you. Once we got through that beginning information, I've got a bunch of pictures here that ultimately are asking you to, if you want to pause, you can do this. What are the non-vascular plants in this picture, and what are the vascular plants? Well, non-vascular plants are generally going to be smaller plants that will grow wide. They'll blanket areas. Vascular plants are going to grow tall. The reason for that is that non-vascular plants don't have vascular tissue for transferring things up and down it. Vascular plants do have vascular tissue. So if you did pause it and you're wondering what's what, this right here would be a vascular plant. This would be a vascular plant. Anything that flowers would be vascular. This is a non-vascular plant. This would be vascular, non-vascular, and grass is vascular. Kind of a rule of thumb is if the plant gets tall, it's vascular. I've got some non-vascular plant information on the PowerPoint here that I'm going to briefly go through. Non-vascular plants, again, are very small plants. Some of you pointed out that they don't have roots. They have rhizoids within your PowerPoint. That's very accurate. Their water is pretty much absorbed directly through the cell walls. They grow in damp environments and they're able to just go through osmosis to get that water into them. And they are seedless, which again, many of you said in your PowerPoint. So continuing on with this, examples would be moss, liverworts, and hornworts, which many of you came up with. And they are frequently called, and you want to make sure you know this term, they are frequently called pioneer species because they are the organisms that usually are first to grow in an area. Maybe there's a volcano or a flood or maybe it's very dry because of a drought. The organisms that usually show up first in a brutal area are the non-vascular ones. Hence, that's why they are given the name pioneer species. So if we click over to our notes, we can see your non-vascular plants are going to not have vascular tissue. They reproduce with spores. They don't have roots, and the best examples are moss, hornworts, and liverworts. There are 3 divisions that we can classify plants into: non-vascular, vascular seedless, and vascular seed. Going back to the PowerPoint, here are some pictures of our non-vascular plants. Now, one thing to note is that you can see this is what stage, gametophyte or sporophyte. You can think about that for a second. Here you can see a stage there, and you can see a stalk popping up here. Well, to answer that question, this would be mostly all gametophyte stage of a moss. Here you've got gametophyte stage with the sporophyte stalk off the top. So that goes back to, I'm going to quickly rewind back to this slide here. The gametophyte stage is that early on stage, whereas the sporophyte stage is a little bit later. There's a lot more to this. I'm being very brief as far as how the gametophyte stage becomes a sporophyte stage, but like I said, I'm just kind of flying through this to give you a quick tutorial of what's going on. So there's some examples of your non-vascular plants. When we look at vascular plants, there's 2 types of vascular plants. There's seedless vascular and there are seed vascular. Of course, seedless vascular plants don't have seeds. How do they reproduce then? They reproduce with spores, just like our non-vascular plants. So they reproduce with spores, but these have vascular tissue, hence the name vascular plant. They can grow bigger and thicker than non-vascular plants. Ferns are probably the best example of this, but club moss and horsetails also fit within this category. I'll flip over to our notes, which again, if you haven't looked at, are posted on Schoology, and you need to make a comment on the notes, as well as this PowerPoint lecture that I'm giving you right now. Here we see vascular seedless plants have vascular tissue. They reproduce with spores. There are your examples. Many of these have roots, stems, and they have fronds instead of leaves. And then these little sacs underneath them called sori that produce spores. These are oftentimes called epiphytes if they live on other plants. Going back to the PowerPoint, here are some pictures of some of the vascular seedless plants. This, of course, would be your fern. Here is a horsetail. And then this is a club moss. The club moss is kind of easy to distinguish because it kind of has that little club at the top of it. So those are your vascular seedless plants. One quick note that I don't have in your notes, these are the plants that usually will turn into coal and be great sources of energy for us to use. Peat is an early form of coal, and peat is formed as a result of fern breaking down, decaying, and staying in the ground for extended periods of time. The longer it stays there, the more pure it becomes, going from lignite to bituminous to anthracite coal. You don't need to know that, but that's just another note I wanted to provide for you. Then we run into this big category of vascular seed plants. Really, most of the things that you think about are probably vascular seed plants. All the crops that we grow, the foods that we eat. You might miss me right now, so I better show you my picture one more time here. The nice roses here, most of the crops that are sold from farmers. Like I said, all my little fruits that I have and vegetables that I've shown you up here. Most all this stuff, anything that you eat, anything that we grow, your grass, gardens, all that stuff is going to be vascular seed stuff. They have stems, they have roots, they have vascular tissue, they have leaves, they reproduce with seeds, they contain an embryo, and they have stored food, which is called a cotyledon. So here you can see some of that. There are 5 divisions that you want to know: cycads, cnidophytes, ginkgos, conifers, and angiosperms. These 4, cycads, cnidophytes, ginkgos, and conifers, fall under a branch called gymnosperms. They are known as the naked seeds. They reproduce with cones. They don't flower. In our area, in North Dakota, we have a lot of pine trees. That would be our conifers. If you've ever been to California, you maybe have seen the big acorn that I have in my room. That would be from redwoods. So that's the big category that you're probably most familiar here would be the conifers in this grouping of 4. The angiosperms, this is anything that flowers. And really most of the stuff in our area. Grass is an angiosperm. All the crops, soybeans, corn, potatoes, sugar beets, so on and so forth, they all fall under angiosperms. The food that you eat generally are angiosperms. So that's what we're looking at with this. Breaking down the parts of a vascular plant, I want you to look through this slide. This is talking about the leaves. So leaves, there's different layers to leaves. You can see here that there's the epidermis. There's stoma, which we've talked about. They have guard cells that wrap around or that are by them. There's palisade layer and a spongy layer. Take a minute to read through that slide. And then here are the picture. Here's a great picture that shows all the parts of a leaf. We talked about the cuticle in your PowerPoint. That's going to be a layer that helps prevent water loss. Here is the upper epidermis. This is the palisade layer. The palisade layer is really, really important for helping photosynthesis go. There's a lot of chlorophyll packed within that palisade layer to help that plant go through photosynthesis. This is called the spongy layer. The spongy layer is important for exchanging gases that are brought in, and then gases that accrue after photosynthesis, getting rid of those. The gases are what go in and out of the stoma. This was a question that I asked you as well. What goes in through the stoma? Well, hopefully you're saying to yourself that CO2 is what goes into the stoma. And what goes out of the stoma? Well, hopefully you're thinking to yourself, what you put down on your answer is oxygen. Unfortunately, when these guard cells are open and the stoma are allowed to exchange these gases, the plant is also going to lose some water with that stoma being open. And that's, if you remember all the way back to many of your favorite chapter on photosynthesis, that's when we get either C4 or C3 plants or CAM plants as they try to limit that amount of water loss. So this is something that I think you should make sure you look through, a microscopic view of a leaf. And again, some of those important parts are listed in my PowerPoint here. You can see the epidermis, stoma, the guard cells. I'll quick highlight these. Epidermis, stomata, guard cells, the palisade layer, and the spongy layer. Stems of vascular plants, they are usually above ground. They are there to support. Some of them store food. I'm going to skip that slide there. Roots, of course, anchor the plant, and they are what are going to potentially store food, and they collect the water. We don't give plants water through their leaves. Certainly the The non-vascular plants can go that route, but when you guys give water to a plant, of course, you put it in the ground and the roots collect that water. Vascular tissue. Here's some important terms that you may or may not have heard of: the xylem and the phloem. These are the two that I really want you to know. The xylem is the tissue within the leaf and throughout the stem of a plant that transport water up, whereas the phloem transfers food down or nutrients down. I'm going to go back to this slide here. Here's our vascular tissue. The xylem carries water up the plant. The phloem carries food down the plant. So just be aware of those two terms and know what they're all about. Okay, let's see. We're going to go on to the next part of our notes. Chapter 22, and again, this is all in a nutshell here. We talked about the differences with cells, so I'm going to skip over here. The chlorophyll, larger vacuoles, and cell walls. We talked about the plant tissue: guard cells, xylem, phloem, lower epidermis, palisade, spongy layer. And you can call it palisade, mesophyll, spongy mesophyll, or you can just keep it simple and go palisade and spongy layers. There's the petiole. I didn't talk about that. That's what's going to attach the leaf to the plant stem, so make sure you know that word. And then plants have hormones that they give off. Now, humans have hormones as well. Animals in general have hormones that they're giving off throughout the plant. There are three main hormones that I want you to look through with plants: auxins, gibberellins, and ethylenes. These are different things that, or chemicals, except for ethylene, that's a gas, that are given off within the plant to help it to do certain things. They can, for instance, the auxins promote or inhibit growth, gibberellins promote plant growth and seed growth, and the ethylenes are there to help that plant ripen. So these are three hormones that I want you to know about, that plants have, and I want you to know what they do. Plants also respond to the environment around them, but they don't call them necessarily responses in plants. They call them tropisms. So a tropism is a response to an external stimuli. Plants really respond to three main things: light, gravity, and touch. When we talk about its response to light, we call it a phototropism. To gravity, we call it a gravitropism. And to touch, we call it a thigmotropism. If it's growing towards that thing, light, gravity, or touch, it would be positive. If going away from it, it would be negative. I've got a couple pictures here. Oops, I didn't mean to highlight that. You can see this first picture here is a picture of a plant growing towards the sun. So therefore, we would call this a positive phototropism. I'm just going to simplify that. It's a positive because it's growing towards photo light, positive phototropism. Here we've got a flower that's wrapping around a fence. So this would be positive for a thigmotropism, a positive thigmotropism that's growing towards touch. What would be an example of a negative tropism? Well, here you can't see it, but the roots are growing down. They are ultimately growing away from the sun. So the roots would have a negative phototropism. Hopefully that makes sense as I went through that. Again, just a brief run through on some of these reactions that plants may have to different stimuli around them. For reproduction, I'm really going to be quick on this because I didn't want to take a ton of your time, but I did want to make sure you got some of this information. Hopefully I'm not making too many mistakes along the way here. But with reproduction, I want you to look through the seedless reproduction and be aware of, again, some of the things we mentioned in this lecture: gametophyte versus sporophyte and how that all works out. Your seedless reproduction would be in your non-vascular plants and in your vascular seedless plants. Conifer reproduction would be anything that does not flower. Again, like our evergreens and spruces and our redwoods. And you can see that they have cones for reproduction, so anything that has a pine cone would fall in this category. For angiosperms, what I did for you, and you maybe remember this stuff, is I put a flower on my PowerPoint so that you could see and practice the different parts. What I'm going to do is say what you should know. You should know what this is, and there's a line right here that I'm going to put C on. Then you should know what all three of these things make up together. Over here, you're going to need to know what this is, and what these two things make up together. So if you want to pause and practice that, you can. On the bottom here, to make things a little simpler, I think I've got the image of the answers. So let's see if I can get that to move forward here. So if you want to pause and practice, but here are your answers ultimately for the picture that I just showed. So you've got stigma, style, ovary, pistil, and then you've got your anther and your filament, which make up your stamen. The stamen is the male part of the flower, male. The pistil is the female part of the flower. What is this all for? Well, that's, again, why we're in the reproduction section. These parts are what allow a plant to reproduce. And it's all broken down here. Some people wonder, and hopefully you guys know this by now, but if not, of course, some people wonder why petals are so colorful. The main reason flowers are usually colorful is because they want to attract pollinators. Sometimes it's there to provide a landing platform for that animal as well. The sepal is mentioned in my notes. That's this part here that protects the flower. So that's called the sepal. And then here's the process. Read through the process and make sure that you're familiar with that. So that's, again, reproduction in a nutshell. Once again, I apologize if I'm going too fast through this. If you guys have questions and you want to visit about any of this, or some of them didn't make sense, or if I did make a mistake, which I very well could have somewhere along the line, feel free to email me or let me know, and I'd be happy to correct that and make this hopefully make a little bit better sense for you. What I'm asking you to do by Thursday at 11:59 is comment on this video in Schoology. There's 3 different things that I want you to do. Number 1, just let me know how the e-learning is going so far. 10 is great, 1 is not good, and give me a brief explanation. You know, is it going okay? Would you have any concerns? I've reached out to a handful of you already, but let me know how things are going. Number 2, do the same exact thing for this video. If we continue to be away from school, this is probably going to be something that I do maybe once a week, depending on, so you guys can get the information via a lecture instead of just being in your books. I hope it's helpful, but let me know what your thoughts are. And then 3 things that you learn from this video about plants. Post this on Schoology by Thursday at 11:59, and you'll get your points for that. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that, endured some of my, antics. Hope you're all doing well. I'm signing off. Have a good night, everybody.